The arrow had missed her ear by inches, its whisper close enough that Vasha could still feel the phantom heat of its passage as she crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at the thin, wetting silk that barely covered her bruised body. Her bare feet screamed protest with every step across the frozen forest floor, leaving smears of crimson on fallen leaves. But terror drove her forward with the mindless urgency of a hunted animal, because Grath's riders would not stop until they dragged her back to that cursed hall and the chains that waited there. She had been running for hours, maybe longer, time losing all meaning in the gray pre-dawn light that filtered through the skeletal trees. The ceremonial gown they had forced her into hung in tatters now, the delicate fabric never meant for anything but display, certainly not for fleeing through wilderness in late autumn. Her lungs burned with each gasping breath, frost crystallizing in the air before her lips, and somewhere behind her came the baying of hounds and the thunder of hooves that meant her master's hunters were closing the distance. Vasha stumbled over a root she never saw, crashing down hard on her hands and knees, and for a moment the pain was so overwhelming she simply stayed there, head hanging, blood dripping from her torn palms to stain the earth beneath. She could stop running. She could let them take her. The thought whispered through her exhausted mind with treacherous sweetness, because at least then the pain would end. At least then she could rest. But memory rose like bile in her throat. The memory of Grath's fist in her hair, his breath reeking of wine as he declared before his assembled war band that she would be his bride whether she willed it or not. She remembered the iron collar locked around her neck, the year of servitude that had taught her exactly what kind of monster wore a chieftain's crown among the border clans. She remembered the others who had defied him and what he had done to them. Vasha forced herself to her feet, swaying, and kept moving. The land had begun to change as she ran, the wild forest giving way to something more orderly. Through the trees she caught glimpses of cleared fields, stubble poking through the first dusting of snow, and the dark shape of a barn rising against the lightening sky. A farm, humans. Her chest tightened with fresh fear because everyone knew how humans treated her kind, the stories of orc hunts and bounties and worse. But the riders were so close now she could hear individual voices calling to one another, coordinating their search, and she had nowhere else to go. The farmhouse materialized from the mist, like something from a half-remembered dream. Stone and timber construction with smoke rising from the chimney promising warmth she had nearly forgotten existed. A vegetable garden lay dormant beside it, and beyond that a chicken coop from which sleepy clucking sounds emerged. Vasha's vision had begun to blur at the edges, black spots dancing across her sight, and she knew with absolute certainty that she could not run any further. Her body had reached its limit. This was where it ended one way or another. She had almost reached the porch steps when her legs finally gave out completely. She fell hard, the impact driving what little air remained from her lungs, and lay there gasping like a fish on dry land. The wound on her shoulder from where one of Grath's warriors had grabbed her had reopened, fresh blood soaking into the ruined silk. She could not even find the strength to crawl further. All she could do was lie there trembling in the mud and wait for whatever fate would find her first. The door opened with a creak of hinges. Vasha's head jerked up, animal panic flooding through her exhausted body, but she had nothing left to run with. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, broad-shouldered and tall, holding a lantern that cast golden light across the yard. For a moment neither of them moved, frozen in mutual shock, and Vasha found herself staring up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a weathered face framed by dark hair that touched his collar. "Holy saints," the man breathed, and started down the steps toward her. Vasha tried to scramble backwards, a whimper escaping her throat, but her body refused to obey, and she only managed to drag herself a few pathetic inches before collapsing again. The man froze immediately, raising one empty hand in a gesture she dimly recognized as meant to show he carried no weapon. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice a low rumble that somehow did not sound threatening despite everything. "Easy there. I am not going to hurt you." As if she had any reason to believe that. As if any human had ever meant those words when speaking to her kind. But he was moving again, slowly, like approaching a wounded deer that might bolt, and then he was kneeling beside her in the mud with no apparent concern for his clothes. Up close, he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 30 summers at most, with the solid build of someone who earned his living through physical labor and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. "You are hurt," he said, and the observation was so obvious it might have been funny under other circumstances. His gaze traveled over her torn dress, her bleeding feet, the wound on her shoulder, and something flickered across his expression too quickly for her to read. "What happened to you?" Vasha opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her tongue felt thick and clumsy, her throat raw from running and gasping in the frozen air. All she could do was stare at him with eyes that burned from tears she refused to shed, because she had learned long ago that crying earned no mercy. That was when the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the fields, distant but approaching fast, and with them the deep-voiced baying of hunting hounds who had caught the scent of their quarry. The man's head snapped toward the sound, his whole body going rigid with alertness, and Vasha watched his jaw tighten as understanding dawned across his features. When he looked back at her, there was something new in those blue eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, and his next words came quick and urgent. "Someone is hunting you." It was not a question, but she nodded anyway, the small motion making her head swim with dizziness. The riders were so close now, maybe just beyond the tree line, and desperation gave her back her voice in a hoarse whisper. "Please," she managed, and the word tasted like ash because begging had never saved anyone, but she had nothing else left to try. "Please do not give me to them." For one terrible heartbeat he simply looked at her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight, and Vasha felt her last fragile hope begin to crumble because why would he help her? She was nothing to him, less than nothing, just an orc runaway in a torn wedding dress bleeding on his property. He would probably get a reward for turning her in. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing, and humans always chose safety over mercy where her kind was concerned. Then Nathan Hartley made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come on," he said, and scooped her up in his arms as though she weighed nothing at all. Vasha made a startled sound, instinct making her tense for violence, but he was already moving, carrying her not toward the road where the riders approached but back toward the farmhouse with swift, purposeful strides. "Stay quiet. Trust me. Trust." As if that were something she could afford to give anyone, ever again. But she was in no position to argue, and her options had narrowed to precisely one. So Vasha pressed her face against his shoulder and let him carry her inside like some bride from the old stories, though there was nothing romantic about the circumstances that had brought her here. The interior of the farmhouse was warm and simply furnished, a main room with a stone fireplace crackling cheerfully, a worn but clean rug on the wooden floor, shelves lined with books that surprised her because she had not expected a farmer to be literate. He did not pause to let her take in the details, instead carrying her through a doorway into what appeared to be a bedroom, and then, before she could question what he intended, pulling open a large wooden chest that sat at the foot of the bed. "In here," Nathan said, already lifting out folded blankets and setting them aside. "It will not be comfortable, but it will hide you." Vasha stared at the chest, at the dark interior that reminded her far too much of the punishment cages Grath had favored, and every instinct screamed at her not to let herself be shut inside. But the hoofbeats were so loud now they echoed from the walls themselves, and she could hear men's voices shouting to one another, spreading out to search the property. She met Nathan's eyes and found him watching her with something that looked like understanding. "I know," he said quietly. "But it is this, or they find you. Your choice." He was giving her the choice. That alone was so foreign to her experience that for a moment Vasha could only stare at him. Then she gathered what remained of her courage and nodded, letting him help her fold her battered body into the chest. It was indeed cramped, forcing her to curl on her side with her knees drawn to her chest. But the wood was smooth and smelled of cedar, and she could breathe through the gaps between the slats. "No matter what you hear," Nathan told her as he draped blankets over her hiding form, "do not make a sound. I will get rid of them." Then the lid closed and darkness swallowed her whole. Vasha lay in the suffocating blackness and tried to slow her breathing, tried to ignore the way panic clawed at her ribs, demanding she escape this wooden prison. She could hear Nathan moving around the room, could hear the rustle of fabric and the creak of the bed frame, and then his footsteps retreating back toward the main room. A moment later came the thunder of fists pounding on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Open up." A voice bellowed, rough with authority and whine. Vasha's blood turned to ice water because she knew that voice would have known it anywhere. Crag, Grath's second in command, a brute of an orc who enjoyed hurting things. "We know you have got a runaway in there, human. Hand her over." There was a pause, long enough that Vasha's heart climbed into her throat, and then she heard the door open. Nathan's voice carried clearly through the house, calm and unbothered, as though being confronted by armed orc riders in the middle of the night was nothing unusual. "Is that so?" "I have not seen anyone, though I imagine I would have noticed an unexpected guest." "Do not play games with us," Crag snarled. "Her trail leads right to your door. We tracked her blood across your yard. Now step aside before this gets unpleasant." "You are welcome to search," Nathan said, and Vasha nearly choked on her own shock because he was inviting them in, letting the very people she had fled examine his home. "But I warn you, you will find nothing but a man trying to get some sleep before his morning chores. It has been a long week, and I have little patience for disturbances." Heavy boots stomped into the house. Vasha pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sound of her breathing, as she listened to at least 3 sets of footsteps spreading through the rooms, overturning furniture from the sound of crashes and curses. They were in the bedroom now, so close she could smell the distinctive musk of her own kind mixed with leather and horse and old blood. Someone kicked the bed frame hard enough to rattle it. "Where is she?" That was Crag again, frustration making his voice even rougher. "The trail ends here." She could not have gone further. "Perhaps your hounds lost the scent," Nathan suggested mildly. "It has been nearly freezing tonight, or perhaps she went around my property rather than through it." "Her blood is on your porch," another voice put in, younger and uncertain. "We saw it." "Then perhaps she collapsed on my porch and her companions carried her off while I slept," Nathan said. "I am just a farmer. I do not track the movements of every creature that passes through my land." A long, dangerous silence followed. Vasha could picture Crag weighing Nathan's words, searching for the lie, trying to decide if this human was worth the trouble of threatening further. The wood of the chest pressed against her injured shoulder, and she bit down on her lip until she tasted copper, refusing to let even the smallest sound of pain escape. "You are playing a dangerous game, human," Crag said finally, each word sharp as a knife. Harboring stolen property is a crime. If we find out you lied to us, if we discover you are hiding her, we will come back and burn this farm to ashes with you inside it. Do you understand me?" "I understand you perfectly," Nathan replied, and there was something in his tone now, something hard as stone beneath the calm. "Just as I trust you understand that this is human territory, under human law, and I have every right to defend my property against trespassers who make threats in the night. My neighbors would take a very dim view of armed riders burning down homesteads, regardless of your grievance." The tension stretched so tight, Vasha thought it must surely snap. She had curled her hands into fists, her broken nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw fresh blood, prepared to throw open the chest and give herself up rather than let this stranger who had shown her kindness die for her sake. But then Cragg made a disgusted sound deep in his throat. "Search the barn," he ordered his companions, "and check the tree line again. If she is here, we will find her." The footsteps retreated, though not before one of them deliberately swept something off a surface, the sound of shattering pottery following. The door slammed hard enough to shake the walls, and then there was only the retreating thud of boots on the porch steps and gradually fading voices as the riders spread out across the property. Vasha waited, barely daring to breathe, listening to them tear through the barn and out buildings with no care for what they destroyed in their search. She did not know how long she lay there in the darkness. Long enough for her cramped muscles to begin screaming in protest, for her shoulder wound to soak her side with sticky warmth, for the sounds of the search to grow more distant as the riders expanded their sweep to the surrounding woods. Long enough that she began to wonder if Nathan had simply walked away and left her here, if she would die in this cedar-scented darkness like some forgotten thing stored away from sight. Then the chest lid lifted and dawn light spilled across her like a benediction. Nathan stood over her, his face grim in the gray morning illumination, and without a word he reached down to help her unfold her stiff limbs and climb from her hiding place. Vasha's legs nearly gave out the moment her feet touched the floor and he caught her reflexively, steadying her with a hand on her uninjured arm until she found her balance. "They are moving east," he said quietly, "but they will circle back. You cannot stay here." Vasha nodded, though the motion made her head swim. "I know. I will go. Thank you for hiding me. I owe you my life." She meant it to be farewell, a final acknowledgement before she forced her broken body to run again, to find somewhere else to hide until the riders gave up or killed her. But when she tried to step away from him, to head toward the door, Nathan's hand tightened on her arm just enough to stop her without hurting. "Wait," he said, and there was something odd in his voice. "You are in no condition to go anywhere. Look at yourself." Vasha looked down and had to acknowledge he spoke truth. She was a mess of blood, and torn fabric and bruises that had begun to purple spectacularly across her green skin. Her feet left red prints on his clean floor. The wound on her shoulder had started bleeding again from the cramped position in the chest. She probably would not make it a mile before collapsing, and when she did the riders would have her. "I have no choice," she said, and was proud that her voice did not shake. "If I stay, I endanger you." They meant what they said about burning the farm. "Let me worry about that," Nathan said. "Right now you need a healer, or at least someone to clean and bind those wounds before they fester. Come into the main room. Let me help you." It was the "let me help you" that undid her. Those simple words offered without demand or expectation of payment. Just a human showing concern for an orc he had no reason to care about. Vasha felt something crack in her chest. Some wall she had built so carefully over the past year, and before she could stop herself, she was nodding and letting him guide her back into the main room where the fire still crackled cheerfully, as though the world had not just turned itself inside out. Nathan settled her onto a chair near the hearth, the warmth immediately making her shiver as frozen skin began to thaw. And then he was moving around the room with quiet efficiency. He filled a basin with water from a kettle hung over the fire, gathered clean cloths, retrieved a wooden box from a shelf that proved to contain various supplies for tending wounds. He worked in silence, and Vasha watched him, too exhausted to do anything else, trying to reconcile this careful competence with everything she had been taught about humans. "This will hurt," he warned as he knelt beside her chair and began cleaning the gash on her shoulder. "But it needs to be done properly." He was right about the pain. The cloth against raw flesh sent fire racing through her nerve endings, and she hissed through clenched teeth, her hands gripping the chair arms hard enough that the wood creaked. But Nathan's touch was as gentle as it could be while still doing the necessary work, his hands steady and sure, and gradually the worst of the agony faded to a bearable throb. "How did this happen?" he asked as he worked, not looking at her face but keeping his attention on the wound. "The truth, if you are willing to share it." Vasha was silent for a long moment, trying to decide how much to reveal, but he had hidden her at great risk to himself, and she found she did not want to lie to him, not after that. "The chieftain of the border clan decided he wanted an orc bride," she said finally, each word careful and measured. "His warriors raided my village 6 seasons ago, took everyone they could as slaves. I have served in his hall ever since. 3 days passed. He declared I would marry him at the next full moon. Last night was the ceremony. I ran during the feast while they were all drunk." Nathan's hand stilled for just a moment, something flickering across his expression, and then he resumed cleaning the wound with even greater care. "Marriage should not require chains. Marriage should not require a lot of things," Vasha said bitterly. "But Grath does not care about should. He cares about what he wants, and he wanted me. Grath." Nathan's voice had gone flat, toneless. "I have heard that name. Grath Ironhand, the self-proclaimed chieftain of the Borderlands. There are stories about him, none of them good." "The stories do not know the half of it," Vasha said. She was staring at the fire now, watching the flames dance, because it was easier than looking at Nathan's face while she spoke. "He killed the old chieftain to take his place. Killed his own blood brother. Anyone who questions him disappears or wishes they had. And the women." She stopped, her throat closing around words she could not force past her lips. "You do not have to tell me," Nathan said gently. He had finished with her shoulder and moved to her feet, carefully cleaning the torn skin and plucking out bits of debris embedded in the wounds. "I can imagine enough." They fell silent after that, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft splash of water being wrung from cloth. Nathan worked his way systematically through her injuries, cleaning and binding with strips of clean linen, and Vasha found herself relaxing incrementally under his care. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with gentleness rather than violence or unwanted desire that she had nearly forgotten what it felt like. "You are skilled at this," she observed as he tied off the bandage around her left foot. "Were you a soldier?" "Once," Nathan admitted. "A long time ago. I served in the border wars when I was younger, saw my share of wounded men, learned field medicine because we did not always have a proper surgeon." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "I also learned that most of what I had been told about orcs was lies meant to make killing easier." Vasha's head came up sharply at that. Nathan was looking at her now, meeting her eyes directly, and she saw old pain there mixed with something that might have been regret. "I am not proud of what I did in those wars," he continued quietly. "I followed orders, believed what my commanders told me about your kind being monsters who killed without mercy. It took watching my best friend die in the arms of an orc healer who tried desperately to save his life for me to understand how thoroughly I had been deceived. That was the day I walked away from the army. I have been here ever since, trying to live a quieter life." Vasha did not know what to say to that. The idea that a human soldier had befriended an orc healer, had learned compassion through tragedy rather than doubling down on hate, was so foreign to her experience she struggled to process it. But it explained why he had hidden her, why he helped her now. He had already made his choice about what her life was worth, years before they ever met. "The healer," she said. "Do you know what became of them?" "She went back to her clan," Nathan said. "I heard later that she became their chief medicine woman, that she trained others in her craft. I hope she had a good life. She deserved one after what she tried to do for Thomas." He shook his head as though clearing away old memories and stood, gathering the soiled cloths. "You need food and rest. When did you last eat?" Vasha had to think about it. The wedding feast had been laid out, but she had been too frightened to touch any of it, and before that. 2 days, maybe 3. They did not feed slaves well. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded and moved to the kitchen area, a partitioned section of the main room with a cast iron stove and shelves of preserved foods. Within minutes, he had assembled a plate of bread, cheese, and some kind of dried meat, along with a cup of water from a covered pitcher. He pressed them into her hands with instructions to eat slowly or make herself sick. Vasha tried to obey, but the first bite of bread was so good after days of hunger that she found herself wolfing it down despite her best intentions. Nathan watched with a small smile that contained no mockery, just understanding, and when she finished, he brought her more without comment. It was only after she had eaten her fill that the full weight of her exhaustion finally crashed down on her like a physical thing. "You should sleep," Nathan said, reading her drooping eyelids accurately. "Take the bed, I will keep watch." "I cannot take your bed," Vasha protested weakly. "I have imposed enough already." "You can and you will," Nathan said firmly. "You are injured and exhausted. You need proper rest, not a few minutes collapsed in a chair. I will wake you if the riders return, I promise." Vasha wanted to argue further, but her body had already made the decision for her, moving toward the bedroom on unsteady feet before her mind could mount a defense. The bed was simple but clean, the mattress stuffed with straw and covered with quilts that smelled faintly of lavender. She collapsed onto it with a groan of relief, every muscle in her body singing gratitude for the softness after so long sleeping on stone floors. She meant to stay awake, to keep her ears alert for the sound of hoofbeats or Nathan calling a warning. But the warmth of the blankets and the safety of the sturdy walls and the lingering effects of blood loss dragged her down into darkness before she could resist. And for the first time in a year, Vasha slept without fear of what might be done to her while she was helpless. She woke to afternoon light slanting through the bedroom window, and the smell of something cooking that made her stomach growl despite the meal she had eaten earlier. For a moment she lay still, disoriented, struggling to remember where she was and why she felt simultaneously better and worse than she had in recent memory. Then it all came flooding back, the flight through the forest, the riders, the human who had hidden her in a cedar chest and then tended her wounds with the care of a healer. Vasha sat up carefully, testing her injuries. Everything hurt, but it was the clean pain of healing rather than the sharp agony of fresh trauma. The bandages on her feet and shoulder were professionally done, already showing signs of starting to mend. She would have scars, but she would live, assuming Grath's riders did not find her. That thought was enough to get her moving despite her body's protests. She could not stay here indefinitely, could not keep endangering Nathan with her presence. She needed to find somewhere else to hide, needed to put distance between herself and this farm before the riders expanded their search pattern and came back to investigate more thoroughly. She was struggling to stand, fighting the dizziness that threatened to send her back down to the mattress, when Nathan appeared in the doorway carrying a bowl that steamed enticingly. "You should not be up yet," he said, but there was no censure in his tone, only concern. "You slept for 8 hours. Your body needs more time to recover." "I cannot stay," Vasha said, though the words came out embarrassingly weak. "The riders will come back. You know they will." "Perhaps," Nathan acknowledged. He crossed the room and set the bowl on a small table beside the bed, then helped ease Vasha back down into a sitting position before she fell. "But right now it is the middle of the afternoon, and they are still searching the eastern woods. I watch them from the north field. They have not given up, but they have not come back here either." He picked up the bowl again and held it out to her. "Eat this, then we can discuss what happens next." The stew in the bowl was thick with vegetables and pieces of chicken, the broth rich and savory. Vasha's pride wanted her to refuse, to insist she was leaving immediately, but her stomach had other ideas, and she found herself accepting the bowl and eating with marginally better control than she had shown at breakfast. Nathan settled into a chair by the window, giving her space but staying close enough to help if needed. "I have been thinking," he said after she was halfway through the stew, "about your situation." Vasha looked up at him warily. "And you need to disappear," Nathan said bluntly. "Not just for a few days until Grath gives up, because men like him do not give up when they think someone has taken something that belongs to them. You need to disappear permanently, completely, in a way that makes him believe you are dead or so far gone you will never be found." "I know," Vasha said. The stew had turned to ash in her mouth. "I have been trying to figure out how. I thought maybe if I could reach the deep mountains, find one of the wild clans who do not trade with border settlements, they might take me in. But I do not know the way, and I would never make it that far on foot, even if I did." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as though working through some complex calculation in his head. When he spoke again, his words came slowly, carefully, as though he was still deciding even as he said them. "There is another option. It would require you to trust me to take a significant risk, but it might work." Vasha set the bowl aside, her full attention on Nathan now. "What kind of option?" "You could stay here," Nathan said. "Hidden, but in plain sight. As far as anyone else knows, I live alone. My nearest neighbor is nearly 2 miles away across the creek. I rarely go into town except to sell crops and buy supplies. If you stayed inside when others were around, if we were very careful, no one would need to know you were here." The suggestion was so unexpected that for several heartbeats Vasha could only stare at him. "You would do that? Risk your home, your safety, for someone you just met?" "I would," Nathan said simply. "I told you, I walked away from the wars because I learned your people were not the monsters I had been taught to fear. I meant that. And even if I had not learned that lesson, no one deserves what Grath would do to you if his riders dragged you back." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I am not saying it would be forever. Once the search dies down, once Grath gives up or moves on to some other obsession, we could find a way to get you to the mountains or wherever else you wanted to go. But for now, while the riders are still hunting, this would be the safest place." Vasha wanted to believe him. The temptation to accept his offer, to stay in this warm farmhouse with someone who had shown her nothing but kindness, was almost overwhelming. But years of surviving under Grath's rule had taught her to look for the trap, to question generosity because it always came with strings attached. "What would you want in return?" she asked, hating the suspicion in her own voice but unable to suppress it. "No one offers something for nothing." What price would I be paying for your protection? Pain flashed across Nathan's face, there and gone in an instant, but Vasha saw it clearly. When he spoke again, his voice had gone very quiet. I want nothing from you except to know that I helped someone who needed help. That is all. You would have your own space, your privacy. I would not demand anything of you, not labor, not companionship, and certainly nothing. He trailed off, seeming unable to complete the thought, then tried again. I am offering sanctuary, Vasha, not a different kind of cage. The fact that he used her name, that he remembered it, though she could not recall telling him, somehow made the offer real in a way it had not been before. Vasha searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint of ulterior motive, and found only earnest concern and a bone-deep weariness that spoke of a man who had seen too much cruelty and chosen to stand against it however he could. Why? She asked, and the word held everything she could not articulate, all her confusion and fear and desperate hope. Why would you do this for me? Nathan was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he stood and moved to the window, looking out across the fields toward the tree line where somewhere beyond, Grath's riders continued their search. 10 years ago, he said finally, I stood in a burned village and listened to my commanding officer explain why we had been ordered to kill everyone we found there, even the children. He said orcs were not really people, that they were beasts in human shape, that mercy would only let them breed more enemies for us to fight later. I believed him because I was 20 years old and he was a decorated war hero, and I thought soldiers who fought for our kingdom must be the good people in the story. He turned back to face her, and his eyes held ghosts. We killed them all, followed our orders. And then Thomas found a survivor, a little girl maybe 5 years old hiding in a root cellar, and before anyone else could react, he picked her up and carried her to the orc healer I mentioned. He told our commander the child was his prisoner, his responsibility, and somehow he made them let him keep her safe until we could leave her with non-combatants. Nathan's hands had curled into fists at his sides. That girl is the reason the healer tried so hard to save Thomas when he was wounded in the next battle. She said anyone who would protect an enemy's child despite orders deserved to live. She worked for 6 hours trying to stop the bleeding, used every skill she had, but the wound was too severe. Thomas died thanking her for trying. He met Vasha's gaze directly. I think about that girl sometimes. Wonder if she survived the war, if she grew up safe somewhere, if she knows a human soldier defied orders to protect her. And I think about all the others I did not protect, the ones I helped kill because I believed what I had been told about your kind. I cannot undo those deaths, but I can make sure that when someone comes to my door fleeing a monster, I do not turn into another monster by sending them back. Silence filled the room, heavy with the weight of old sins and new choices. Vasha felt tears burning behind her eyes and blinked them back fiercely because crying solved nothing, but her chest ached with an emotion she could not name. This human had looked at her, bloody and desperate and everything he had been trained to fear, and chosen to see a person worth saving. More than that, he was offering her a future beyond simple survival, a chance to rest and heal in safety while the storm of Grath's wrath blew itself out. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Nathan replied gently. Or say no if you truly think you would be better off running. But say something because those riders will not search forever and we need to decide what you are doing before they widen their pattern again. Vasha looked around the small bedroom with its simple furnishings and clean quilts, then back at Nathan with his scarred hands and haunted eyes and absolute sincerity. Every instinct screamed that she should run, that trusting anyone was foolish, that this offer was too good to be real. But she was so very tired of running, of fear, of expecting cruelty from every quarter. And something in Nathan's story about the little girl and the healer and his dead friend resonated in her chest like a bell being struck, calling her to take this leap of faith. "Yes," she said, and felt the word reshape her future even as it left her lips. "I will stay, for now, until it is safe for me to leave." The relief that washed across Nathan's face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Good," he said roughly. "That is good. We will make this work, I promise." And so began the strangest period of Vasha's life. The first few days were tense affairs, every hoofbeat on the distant road sending her diving for hiding places, every unfamiliar sound making her heart race with panic that the riders had returned. Nathan kept his promise about giving her space, setting up a small area in what had been a storage room with a proper bed and privacy. Though Vasha found herself spending most of her time in the main room near the fire, because the walls felt safer when she could see the doors and windows. Nathan went about his daily work on the farm, tending to animals and preparing fields for winter, and Vasha discovered she could not simply sit idle while he labored. On the third day, she started helping with small tasks, mending a torn shirt she found in a basket, because sewing was one of the few skills she had been allowed to develop in Grath's Hall. Nathan protested at first, but Vasha insisted, needing to feel useful, needing to contribute something to balance the debt she felt she owed him. They fell into a routine without quite meaning to. Nathan would wake early and do the morning chores while Vasha slept, still recovering from her ordeal. She would rise around mid-morning to find breakfast waiting and Nathan already out in the fields or barn. She would spend her days doing whatever tasks she could manage that kept her inside and out of sight, mending clothes, preparing vegetables for storage, cleaning the house with obsessive thoroughness, because it gave her something to focus on besides her fear. Nathan would return for lunch, and they would eat together in careful silence, neither quite sure how to bridge the gulf of species and experience that separated them. But gradually, as the days turned to a week and then two, the silence began to give way to conversation. It started small, practical exchanges about household matters or the farm work. Nathan would mention that the chickens were laying poorly, and Vasha would suggest adding crushed eggshells to their feed, because her mother had done that in their village. Vasha would ask about a tool she had found in a cupboard, and Nathan would explain its purpose and show her how to use it properly. Little by little, they learned to exist in the same space without constant tension, their movements around each other developing the unconscious coordination of people who shared a home rather than strangers forced together by circumstance. The first personal conversation happened almost by accident. Vasha had been examining the books on Nathan's shelves, curious despite herself because books had been forbidden luxuries in Grath's Hall, allowed only to the chieftain and his chosen few. She was carefully running her fingers over the spines, mouthing the titles she could puzzle out from her limited literacy, when Nathan came in from the cold afternoon and found her there. "You read?" he asked, sounding surprised. Vasha jerked her hand back guiltily. "A little. My mother taught me when I was young before the raids. I am not very good at it anymore." "You are welcome to any of those," Nathan said, moving to stoke the fire. "I do not have many, but you are free to read whatever you like." "Really?" Vasha could not keep the longing from her voice. "I can read them, of course." Nathan glanced at her, puzzled. "Why would I keep books if not to be read?" "Grath kept books," Vasha said quietly. "A whole chest of them taken as spoils from raids, but slaves were not permitted to touch them. He said knowledge was power and orcs like us did not deserve power." Nathan's expression darkened. "Grath is a fool and a tyrant. Knowledge is not power, it is freedom, and everyone deserves freedom." He pulled down a worn volume with a blue cover. "This one is good if you like adventure stories. It is about a group of travelers seeking a lost city. Easy language, moves quickly. A good place to start if your reading is rusty." Vasha accepted the book with trembling hands, cradling it like something precious because to her it was. That evening, after supper was cleared and Nathan had settled in a chair with a farming almanac, she curled up near the fire with the blue book and slowly, painstakingly worked her way through the first chapter. It was hard. Her reading skills deteriorated from disuse, but the story captured her attention and dragged her forward through the difficult words until she was so engrossed she did not notice Nathan watching her with a small smile. After that, books became their bridge. Nathan would recommend volumes, would help her puzzle out difficult words, would sometimes read passages aloud when she got frustrated with her own stumbling pace. They would discuss the stories during meals, arguing about character motivations or debating what might happen next. Vasha discovered Nathan had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed, and Nathan learned that Vasha had a gift for seeing through to the emotional truth of stories, understanding character better than plot. The first time Vasha laughed at something Nathan said, a ridiculous observation about a particularly pompous character in one of the adventure novels, they both froze in shock. The sound seemed to echo in the small farmhouse, so unexpected it was nearly foreign. Vasha could not remember the last time she had felt light enough to laugh, and from Nathan's expression, he had not expected to ever hear such a sound from her. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, and then Nathan smiled, really smiled, and something warm and fragile bloomed in Vasha's chest. 3 weeks into her stay, the riders came back. Vasha had been in the kitchen area preparing lunch when Nathan's warning whistle came from outside, the signal they had arranged for danger. Her heart leaped into her throat and she bolted for the storage room, diving into the hiding space Nathan had constructed behind a false panel in the wall. It was more comfortable than the chest had been but still cramped, and she pressed her ear to the gap in the wood to listen to what followed. This time there were only 2 riders, Crag and one other, and they were brusque and suspicious. They searched the house thoroughly, overturning furniture, checking the bedroom and storage areas with clear skepticism about Nathan's continued insistence that he lived alone. Vasha held her breath when they entered the storage room, when boots stomped past mere feet from her hiding place, but the false panel held and they found nothing. "She has disappeared like smoke," Crag finally admitted, frustration turning his voice ugly. 2 weeks we have searched and not a trace beyond her blood on your porch. "Perhaps she died in the woods," Nathan suggested neutrally. "Injured as she was, with winter coming on, she might have frozen or bled out somewhere in the wilderness." "Maybe," Crag did not sound convinced. "Or maybe someone is hiding her. Maybe someone thinks they can shelter a runaway and Grath will not find out." "That would be remarkably stupid," Nathan said, "given what your chieftain does to people who cross him." "It would," Crag agreed. "So I am sure you will keep reporting if you see anything unusual. Because Grath has a long memory and he pays well for information, but he also punishes liars with great creativity." "I will certainly inform the proper authorities if I see a runaway slave," Nathan said with absolutely no inflection. "Now, if you are done destroying my home, I have work to do before dark." The riders left with final threats and warnings, and Vasha waited in her hiding space until Nathan's all-clear signal came before emerging on shaking legs. He was standing in the main room surveying the damage, his expression grim, and when he saw her something tight in his face relaxed. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately. Vasha shook her head, not trusting her voice. The close call had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. If they had found the hidden panel, if Nathan had not built it so cleverly, if she had made even the smallest sound. "Hey," Nathan said gently, and then he was there, his hands careful on her shoulders, steadying her. "You are safe. They did not find you. They are giving up, did you hear? Crag thinks you are dead. That is good for us. He also threatened you," Vasha managed. "Warned you about harboring runaways. Nathan, I cannot let you keep risking yourself for me, if Grath finds out what you have done." "He will not find out," Nathan said firmly. "Because you are going to stay hidden, and I am going to keep my mouth shut, and eventually they will stop looking entirely. We just have to be patient." Vasha searched his face, looking for doubt or fear or resentment, but found only determination and something softer she could not quite identify. "You really mean to see this through, to keep hiding me until it is safe?" "I really do," Nathan confirmed. "You are not going back to Grath, Vasha, not while I am alive to prevent it." The vehemence in his voice startled her. This was more than just honoring a promise or salving a guilty conscience about old wars. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, Nathan had become personally invested in her safety, in her future, and the realization made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not think I have properly thanked you for everything. For saving my life, for giving me shelter, for treating me like a person rather than property. Thank you." Nathan's hands tightened briefly on her shoulders, then released. "You do not need to thank me for basic decency. That is the minimum any person deserves." "The minimum is not what most people give," Vasha pointed out. "You could have turned me in for the reward. You could have helped me just enough to salve your conscience and then sent me on my way. You could have demanded repayment in labor or coin or other things. But you did none of that. You have asked nothing of me except that I stay safe. That is more than decency, Nathan. That is honor." He looked uncomfortable with the praise, ducking his head in a way she had come to recognize meant he did not know how to respond. "I am just doing what is right." What is right and what people actually do are often very different things, Vasha said. "You have given me a gift I can never repay. I want you to know I understand that, even if I do not have adequate words to express it." They stood there in the wreckage of the main room, surrounded by overturned furniture and scattered belongings, and something shifted between them. It was subtle, a change in the air like the first hint of spring after long winter, but Vasha felt it down to her bones. The dynamic that had begun as desperate fugitive and reluctant savior had transformed into something else, something that felt almost like friendship, and the possibility of it both thrilled and terrified her. Winter settled over the farm in earnest after that, bringing snow that covered the fields in white blankets and kept Nathan closer to the house for longer periods. Vasha had expected the enforced proximity to strain their careful equilibrium, but instead found it deepened. With the outside world reduced to a frozen landscape, and the riders finally abandoning their search, the farmhouse became its own small universe where two people learned to exist together in something approaching peace. Nathan taught Vasha to cook properly. Meals beyond the simple stews and breads she had cobbled together in Grath's kitchens under the watchful eyes of cruel overseers. He showed her how to make pastry that flaked under the fork, how to season meat so it sang with flavor, how to create dishes that were art as much as sustenance. Vasha discovered she had a talent for it, an intuitive sense of how flavors worked together, and took fierce pride in the meals she prepared. Vasha taught Nathan songs from her childhood, the old orc melodies her mother had sung while weaving or grinding grain. He picked them up quickly despite the unfamiliar rhythms, his deep voice blending with her rougher alto in harmonies that filled the farmhouse with something other than silence. They would sing while working, while cooking, while sitting by the fire in the evenings, and the music became another language they shared. They talked. Hours upon hours of conversation covering everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. Nathan told her about growing up on a different farm east of here, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about the reasons he had joined the army and the reasons he had left. Vasha told him about her village before the raids, about her mother who had been a weaver of great skill, and her father who had made beautiful carvings from wood and bone. She told him about her younger brother who had tried to fight the raiders and been cut down before her eyes, about being dragged away in chains while her home burned. They did not talk about Grath if they could avoid it. That was a wound still too raw, a subject that made Vasha's hands shake and her breathing shallow. Nathan respected the boundary without needing to be told, steering conversations away from dark waters whenever she approached them too closely. The first real snow of the season fell in early December, a heavy blanket that transformed the world overnight. Vasha woke to sunlight reflecting off white drifts and could not suppress a gasp of wonder at the beauty of it. She had seen snow before, obviously, had endured winters in Grath's cold stone hall, but there was something different about viewing it from safety and warmth, knowing she could admire it without fear. Nathan found her standing at the window, her breath fogging the glass, and came to stand beside her. "We will be fairly isolated for the next few months," he said. "The road drifts over and travel becomes difficult. I usually stay close to home until spring thaw." He glanced at her. "I hope you will not find it too confining." "Confining," Vasha laughed, the sound still unfamiliar but growing easier. "I spent a year confined to a chieftain's hall with a collar around my neck. This house is not confining, Nathan. It is freedom." Something complicated crossed his face at that. "I am glad you see it that way. Though I hope someday you will have real freedom, not just a different kind of cage with more comfortable bars." "This is not a cage," Vasha said firmly. "A cage is a place you cannot leave by your own choice. You have told me many times that I can go whenever I wish, that you will help me reach the mountains or wherever else I want. That makes this a home, not a prison." "Is it your home, though?" Nathan asked quietly. "Or just a safe place you are staying temporarily until you can leave?" The question caught Vasha off guard because she had not let herself think about it in those terms. Home was a concept so tied up with loss and pain that she had tried not to examine what this place meant to her. But Nathan was looking at her with those blue eyes that saw too much, waiting for an honest answer, and Vasha found herself speaking truth she had not acknowledged even to herself. "I do not know," she admitted. "I have not had a home since the raiders took me. This place feels safer than anywhere I have been in years, and you—" She paused, trying to find the right words. "You feel like someone I could trust, like someone I do trust, but I do not know if that makes this home or just a rest stop on a longer journey." Nathan nodded slowly. "That is fair. And honest. I appreciate that." He was quiet for a moment, still looking out at the snow. "For what it is worth, you are welcome to stay as long as you want, even after it is safe for you to leave, even after spring comes and the roads clear. If you wanted to stay permanently, if you thought you could be happy here, I would be glad of the company." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to fully examine. Vasha's heart was beating too fast, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. The idea of staying, of making this more than temporary sanctuary, was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "I will think about it," she said finally. "When spring comes and the choice is real, I will think about what I want." "That is all I ask," Nathan said. Then he smiled, deliberately lightening the mood. In the meantime, that snow means I need to secure the barn better before the next storm, and we should probably inventory our food stores to make sure we have enough to last until spring. They fell back into practical matters, but something had changed with that conversation. The possibility of permanence had been voiced, made real, and it colored every interaction that followed. Vasha caught herself thinking about next winter, about plans that extended beyond simple survival. She found herself caring for the house not just as a way to earn her keep, but because it mattered to her that this place be comfortable and welcoming. She started thinking of Nathan's books as our books, the kitchen as our kitchen, the farm as home rather than Nathan's home where she was staying. The winter solstice came and went. Nathan observed it with a small ceremony he said his mother had taught him, lighting candles at sunset and speaking words of gratitude for the year's blessings. Vasha shared an Orc tradition, weaving small protective charms from dried grass and herbs to hang over the doorways for luck. They combined their customs into something new, something that belonged to both of them, and Vasha felt another piece of herself settling into place. It was sometime in January, on a bitter cold night when frost painted the windows with elaborate patterns, that Vasha finally admitted to herself what had been growing in her chest for weeks. She was falling in love with Nathan Hartley. The realization came as she watched him reading by the fire, his face relaxed in concentration, occasionally smiling at something in the text. He had been nothing but kind to her, nothing but respectful and patient and good, and somewhere along the way her gratitude had transformed into something deeper and more dangerous. She loved the way he moved through the world with quiet competence, the way he treated her like an equal despite all the ways society said they were not, the way he listened when she spoke as though her words mattered. She loved his rare smiles and his terrible jokes, and the way he sang off-key when he thought she could not hear. She loved his hands, scarred and capable, and his eyes that held old pain but also hope. She loved him, and the knowledge was both joy and agony because she had no idea if he felt anything similar, or if she was just a responsibility to him, a good deed to balance old sins. Nathan looked up then, catching her staring, and raised an eyebrow. "Is something wrong?" "No," Vasha said quickly, feeling her green skin darken with a blush. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About you," she thought but did not say. "About how strange life is. 6 months ago I could not have imagined being here, safe and warm with someone I trust. A year ago I did not think I would survive to see another winter. It is odd how quickly circumstances can change." Nathan set his book aside, giving her his full attention. "Are you happy here, Vasha? Truly?" She considered lying or deflecting, but they had built their fragile peace on honesty and she would not damage it now. "Yes," she said simply. "Happier than I have been since before the raids. You have given me that. You and your kindness and your willingness to see me as a person. I will never forget that." "Good," Nathan said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. "I want you to be happy. You deserve to be happy after everything you endured." He was looking at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, as though he wanted to say more but was holding back. Vasha felt the moment stretch between them, thick with words neither quite dared to speak, and then Nathan cleared his throat and picked up his book again, breaking the spell. "It is getting late," he said, his tone deliberately casual. "We should probably get some sleep. Morning comes early on a farm even in winter." Vasha agreed, and they went through their evening routine, banking the fire and checking the doors, moving around each other with the practiced ease of long familiarity. But as she lay in her small room staring at the dark ceiling, Vasha's mind would not quiet. She replayed that moment by the fire again and again, trying to decipher what she had seen in Nathan's eyes. Hope? Affection? Or was she reading meaning into nothing because she wanted so desperately for him to feel something beyond duty? She did not know. And she was too afraid of ruining what they had built to risk asking. February brought a thaw, a false spring that melted the snow into gray slush and turned the roads to impassable mud. Nathan declared it the worst time of year on a farm. Everything cold and wet and miserable, with none of winter's stark beauty or spring's promise of renewal. Vasha privately disagreed, because even the gray dreariness of late winter thaw was beautiful when viewed from safety beside someone she cared for. They were both going slightly stir-crazy from weeks of being trapped indoors by weather when the accident happened. Nathan had gone out to check on the barn, making sure the roof was not leaking now that snow melt was running everywhere. Vasha was inside making lunch when she heard a crash, followed by a shout of pain that sent terror straight through her heart. She was out the door and running across the muddy yard before conscious thought caught up. All her careful protocols about staying hidden forgotten in the face of Nathan's distress. She found him on the ground beside the barn, his leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn, a section of rotted roof beam lying across him. He had obviously been inspecting the damage from below when the beam gave way and came down on top of him. Nathan. Vasha dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly because she did not know where to touch without causing more pain. What happened? How bad is it? Beam was more rotten than I thought, Nathan ground out through clenched teeth. His face had gone gray with pain, and there was blood seeping through his trouser leg. Hit my leg when it fell. I think it is broken. Help me get this beam off. Together, they managed to shift the heavy timber enough for Nathan to drag himself free, though the motion made him cry out and nearly pass out. Vasha got her shoulder under his arm and helped him limp back to the house, every step clearly agony. Once inside, she eased him onto the bed and carefully cut away his trouser leg to examine the damage. The break was bad, though not as catastrophic as she had feared. A clean fracture of the lower leg, the bone not quite poking through the skin but close. She had seen injuries like this in Grath's Hall, warriors wounded in raids or drunken brawls, and watched the rough treatment they received. She knew what needed to be done even if she had never done it herself. I need to set it, she told Nathan, who had his eyes screwed shut in pain. It is going to hurt, I know. Nathan cracked one eye open to look at her. Have you done this before? No, but I have seen it done. I know the theory. She tried to sound more confident than she felt. I can do this, Nathan. Trust me. I do trust you, Nathan said immediately, and the absolute certainty in his voice gave her courage. Vasha gathered supplies, clean cloth for bandages, straight pieces of wood for a splint, rope to bind it. She gave Nathan a leather strap to bite down on, then positioned herself to pull the leg straight. This was going to hurt him terribly, and she hated that she had to cause him pain, but there was no other option. If the bone did not set properly, he could lose the leg to infection or permanent damage. Ready? She asked. Nathan nodded, the strap clenched between his teeth. Vasha pulled. Nathan's muffled scream through the leather was one of the worst sounds she had ever heard, but she did not let it stop her. She felt for the bone, felt it slide back into alignment under her careful manipulation, and then held it steady while she worked as quickly as she could to apply the splint and bind it securely. Nathan had passed out halfway through the process, which was probably a mercy, and by the time she finished her hands were shaking and her face wet with tears she had not realized she was shedding. She sat back on her heels and stared at her work. The splint looked professional enough, the leg properly aligned, the binding secure but not tight enough to cut off circulation. She thought she had done it right. She hoped she had done it right, because if she had failed then Nathan would pay the price for her incompetence. Nathan woke an hour later to find Vasha sitting beside the bed, watching him with desperate anxiety. His leg throbbed with pain, but it was manageable, the kind of pain that meant healing rather than damage. "Did you set it?" he asked hoarsely. "Yes, I think so. Does it feel right?" "Can you tell if I did it wrong?" The words tumbled out in a rush of worry. Nathan carefully flexed his foot, testing the range of motion, and felt the bones stay properly aligned. "You did fine. Better than fine. It feels like it will heal properly." He tried to smile reassuringly despite the pain. "Thank you for pulling me together. Literally." Vasha made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "I was terrified. I thought I might make it worse, and you trusted me to do it anyway." "Of course I trusted you," Nathan said. "You are smart and careful, and you care about doing things right." "Why would I not trust you?" "Because I am an orc and you are human and we are supposed to be enemies," Vasha suggested, her voice cracking. "Because I have been here 4 months and you still barely know me. Because I could have hurt you and you had no guarantee I would not." Nathan reached out and caught her hand, his grip weak but deliberate. "I know you, Vasha. Maybe not every detail of your past or every thought in your head, but I know who you are. You are someone who ran barefoot through a frozen forest rather than submit to a monster. You are someone who cannot sit idle when there is work to be done, even when you are recovering from your own injuries. You are someone who sings while cooking and cries at sad parts in books, and tries so hard to be good even when life has given you every reason to be bitter. I know you and I trust you, and I knew you would do your best to help me. That was enough." Vasha stared at him, her yellow eyes wide with shock, and Nathan realized he had said far more than he had intended. But the words were out now, his feelings laid bare by pain and medicine, and he found he did not want to take them back. He meant every word. At some point, this orc woman who had fled to his farm in desperation had become the most important person in his life, and he was tired of pretending otherwise. "Nathan," Vasha whispered, and there was something raw and wondering in her voice. "You do not have to say anything," Nathan interrupted quickly, suddenly afraid of what she might say, how she might let him down gently because surely she did not feel the same way. "I am sorry. That was too much. I should not have." "Stop talking," Vasha said, and then she was leaning forward and kissing him. It was brief, clumsy, their first kiss and obviously unpracticed on both sides. Vasha's small tusks made the angle awkward, and Nathan's surprise made him freeze rather than respond. But it was perfect anyway. Perfect because it was them, and because it meant she felt something too. This connection that had been growing between them all winter long. When Vasha pulled back, her face was darker green with an intense blush, her expression caught between hope and terror. "Was that okay? In Grath's Hall there were, but I never wanted. This is the first time I have kissed someone because I chose to." "It was more than okay," Nathan managed, his heart racing fast enough that he felt lightheaded. "I just was not expecting it." "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Vasha admitted in a rush. "Maybe longer. I did not know if you felt the same way or if I was just someone you were helping out of obligation. But you said those things about knowing me and trusting me, and I thought maybe you care about me." "The way I care about you, I care about you," Nathan said, and there was no point in hiding it now. "So much, Vasha. You have become essential to me in ways I did not expect. When I saw that beam fall, when I thought I might be badly hurt, my first thought was not about my own pain, but about how you would manage if something happened to me. About whether you would be safe. That is when I knew for certain that what I felt was more than just wanting to help someone in need." Vasha's eyes had gone bright with tears. I was so scared when I heard you shout. I thought you might be dead, and I realized I could not bear that. That somewhere along the way you had become my whole world, and I did not want to exist in a world without you in it." They stared at each other, both slightly shocked by the confessions that had spilled out, and then Nathan laughed, though it came out shaky. "This is a terrible time for this conversation. I can barely think through the pain in my leg." "Then rest," Vasha said, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "We can talk more when you are feeling better. For now, just know that I am here, that I am not going anywhere, and that I—" She paused, then said the words with quiet conviction, "that I love you, Nathan Hartley. I probably should not, for about 1,000 reasons, but I do." "I love you too," Nathan said, and the words felt like coming home. "I have for weeks, maybe longer. I just did not know how to tell you." Vasha's smile was brilliant enough to light the room. She kissed him again, softer this time, more certain, and then settled into the chair beside the bed with the clear intention of keeping watch over him. Nathan drifted off to sleep with her hand clasped in his, and something that felt dangerously close to happiness blooming in his chest, despite the throbbing pain in his leg. The next few weeks were difficult as Nathan's leg healed. He was a terrible patient, constantly trying to get up and do things before he was ready, and Vasha found herself scolding him repeatedly about following his own healing timeline. But there was something sweet about the enforced intimacy. Vasha taking on all the farm work she could manage while Nathan directed from the bed. Both of them navigating this new dynamic where they were openly affectionate rather than carefully distant. They talked for hours, lying side by side on the bed fully clothed while Nathan healed, mapping out all the things they had not said during the months of polite coexistence. Vasha told him about the life she had imagined before the raids, the hope that she might follow her mother into weaving or maybe learn healing arts like her aunt. Nathan told her about dreams he had abandoned when he joined the army, plans to maybe expand the farm or travel to see the ocean. They talked about fears and hopes and the future that now seemed to stretch before them, full of possibility rather than just survival. "When my leg heals," Nathan said one evening as they watched the sun set through the bedroom window, "we should have a proper courtship. Do things right." Vasha raised an eyebrow. "As opposed to the improper courtship we have been conducting. I want to court you properly," Nathan insisted. "Take you on walks when the weather clears, maybe go fishing at the creek, do the things couples do when they are discovering they care for each other." "We already discovered that," Vasha pointed out, amused. "We fell in love while you taught me to cook and I taught you to sing orc songs. That seems fairly proper to me." "You know what I mean," Nathan said, reaching for her hand. "I want to give you the experience of being wooed, of being treated like someone precious. You deserve that after everything." Vasha laced her fingers through his, marveling as always at how his larger hand engulfed hers. "I would like that," she admitted. "Though you should know that by orc customs, I would be expected to do some of the wooing. Orcish women are not passive in courtship." "I look forward to it," Nathan said with a grin. "Teach me how orcish courtship works. We can combine our traditions like we did for the solstice." So as Nathan healed, they planned their courtship, creating something new from the blending of human and orc traditions. Vasha explained the orcish practice of gift-giving, where the woman presented her chosen mate with things she had made with her own hands to demonstrate her capability and care. Nathan described human courtship rituals, the presentation of flowers, the formal asking of permission to walk out together, the slow progression toward deeper commitment. By the time Nathan could walk again with only a slight limp, they had designed their own unique approach that honored both their heritages. Spring arrived properly in late March, the snow melting away to reveal muddy fields ready for planting. Nathan's leg had healed well enough for light work, and he threw himself into preparing the farm for the new season with Vasha working beside him. They fell into an easy partnership, dividing tasks according to ability and preference, and the farm began to take on new life under their combined efforts. Nathan carved a small wooden comb for Vasha, spending hours making sure every tooth was perfectly smooth and decorating the handle with intricate patterns. He presented it to her shyly one morning, and she treasured it, running it through her dark hair every night while he watched with soft eyes. Vasha wove Nathan a new shirt from fabric she carefully traded for during a rare trip to town while he was recovering, staying carefully hidden but managing the transaction through a sympathetic shopkeeper. She stitched protective symbols along the seams in the Orcish tradition, invoking safety and health and prosperity. When she gave it to him, Nathan held it like something sacred and wore it every chance he could. They walked together in the evenings, following the creek that bordered Nathan's property, and talked about everything and nothing. Nathan picked early wildflowers and presented them with solemn ceremony. Vasha found a particularly fine skipping stone and gave it to him with the Orcish explanation that it represented the strength to overcome obstacles. They were courting, officially and deliberately, and it was sweet and awkward and perfect. It was on one of these evening walks, as spring eased toward summer and the world turned green around them, that Nathan stopped beside the creek and turned to face Vasha with an expression of nervous determination. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about the future, about what we want and what is possible." Vasha's heart began to beat faster. "What have you been thinking?" "That I do not want this to be temporary," Nathan said. "I do not want to wake up one morning and find you have decided to leave for the mountains or anywhere else. I want you to stay permanently as my partner in every way. I want—" He took a breath. "I want to marry you, Vasha, if you will have me." The world seemed to hold its breath. Vasha stared at Nathan, at this human man who had risked everything to protect her, who had nursed her wounds and sheltered her through winter, who had fallen in love with her despite every social convention that said they were wrong for each other. She thought about the girl she had been before the raids, who had never imagined loving someone outside her own kind. She thought about the broken slave in Grath's Hall, who had believed she would never be free enough to choose her own fate. And she thought about the woman she had become here in this place, with this man who saw her as an equal and a partner and someone worthy of love. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like a door opening onto a future she had never dared imagine. "Yes, I will marry you." Nathan's whoop of joy startled birds from the nearby trees. He swept Vasha into his arms, spinning her around despite his still healing leg, and kissed her with unrestrained happiness. Vasha kissed him back just as enthusiastically, laughing against his mouth, feeling like she might float away on the wave of pure joy cresting in her chest. When they finally broke apart, breathless and grinning, Nathan kept his arms around her waist. "We will have to figure out how to do this properly. The human magistrate in town would probably not be willing to officiate an interspecies marriage, and I do not know enough about orc traditions to do it correctly by your people's customs. Then we make our own traditions," Vasha said firmly. "Like we have been doing all along. We will create a ceremony that honors both our heritages and binds us together in the way that matters most, our commitment to each other." And so they did. Over the next few weeks, they planned their wedding, drawing on the elements of both their cultures that resonated most deeply. There would be no official sanction from either human or orc authorities, but they did not need external validation. This was about them, about choosing each other deliberately and creating a bond that no one else could break. They held the ceremony on the summer solstice, in the clearing by the creek where Nathan had proposed. Vasha wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple but elegant in green fabric that complemented her skin. Nathan wore the shirt she had made him, along with trousers he had carefully brushed clean. They had no witnesses besides the birds and the trees and the creek running over smooth stones, but that seemed right for a wedding that existed outside social sanction. Nathan spoke the traditional human vows, modified slightly to fit their circumstances, promising to love and cherish and protect Vasha for all his days. Vasha spoke the orcish pledge of bonding, swearing by earth and sky to stand beside Nathan in all things, to be his partner in work and life and love. They exchanged rings Nathan had hammered from old coins, crude but meaningful, and marked each other's foreheads with symbols of blessing drawn in berry juice, because they had no formal priest to sanctify their union. When they finally kissed as husband and wife, the sun was setting in brilliant colors across the sky, painting the world in golds and reds and purples. It felt like the universe itself was celebrating with them, approving of this unlikely union between human and orc, former soldier and escaped slave. Two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen love, despite every reason to be afraid. They walked back to the farmhouse hand in hand as twilight deepened into night. Inside, Vasha had prepared a feast using all the skills Nathan had taught her plus innovations of her own. They ate and drank and talked late into the night, celebrating not just their marriage but their survival, their freedom, the future they would build together. When they finally made their way to bed, it was to the room they now shared, the storage room long since converted to a study since Vasha had moved into Nathan's space with his enthusiastic blessing. They made love for the first time as husband and wife, tender and careful and joyful, learning each other's bodies with the same patient attention they had given to learning each other's hearts. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Vasha thought about the journey that had brought her here. The terror of fleeing Grath's Hall, the pain of running barefoot through frozen forests, the desperate hope that had led her to collapse on Nathan's porch. If someone had told her that night that within a year she would be married to the human who found her, that she would be happy and safe and loved, she would not have believed them. But here she was, wrapped in her husband's arms in a farmhouse that had become home, and the impossible had somehow become her reality. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked sleepily, his hand moving in slow circles on her back. "That I am grateful," Vasha said softly, "that I found you. That you chose to help me instead of turning me in, that we found our way to this." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "My whole life changed because you were brave enough to hide me when the riders came. Everything good I have now exists because you saw me as a person worth saving." Nathan was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling. "You saved yourself," he said finally. "You were the one who ran, who refused to accept what Grath tried to force on you. You were the one who survived the forest and the wounds and the fear. I just gave you a place to rest while you healed. You did the hardest part." "We saved each other," Vasha countered. "You gave me sanctuary and I gave you purpose. You taught me I could trust again, and I taught you that the healing you sought from the wars could be found in building rather than running away. We are better together than we were separate." "That is the truth," Nathan agreed. He pulled her closer, tucking her head under his chin. "I love you, Vasha Hartley." The name made her smile even in the darkness, Vasha Hartley. She had taken his surname as part of their private ceremony, marking herself as his wife in the human tradition, while he had promised to honor her family line by teaching their future children about orcish culture and customs. Vasha Hartley, who was both fully orc and fully married to a human who existed in the space between two worlds and had made peace with the contradiction. "I love you too," she whispered back. My husband, my savior, my home. They drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the farmhouse quiet around them, the future unfolding with possibility. The months and years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were close calls when neighbors stopped by unexpectedly, and Vasha had to hide. Whispers and rumors in town about the hermit farmer who seemed too content for a man living alone. There was the autumn when Cragg's raiders came through the region again, and they had to be extra vigilant. Vasha spending 3 days hidden in the root cellar while Nathan fended off suspicious questions. But there were far more joys than struggles. Their first harvest together, when the fields produced bounty beyond what Nathan had ever managed alone, and they celebrated with a feast of thanksgiving. The winter when Vasha taught Nathan to carve in the orcish style, and he created beautiful figurines that she treasured. The spring when they expanded the farm, adding new fields and a larger barn built with combined labor. The quiet evenings by the fire reading together, the morning chores done side by side, the 1,000 small intimacies of a marriage built on genuine partnership. 2 years after their wedding, Vasha discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled them in equal measure. They knew the child would be visible proof of their relationship, that a half-orc baby would raise questions they might not be able to answer safely. But they also wanted this, wanted the family they could create together, and they were willing to face whatever consequences came. They prepared carefully through the pregnancy, building a story about Nathan adopting a half-orc orphan to explain the child if necessary. Vasha's pregnancy went smoothly, her strong constitution serving her well, and on a cold winter morning she delivered a healthy daughter with green skin a few shades paler than her mother's, small tusks that would grow more prominent with age, and her father's striking blue eyes. They named her Thessa, a name that worked in both human and orcish pronunciation, and she became the center of their world. Raising Thessa brought new challenges and joys. They taught her about both her heritages, human practicality and orcish strength, reading her stories from Nathan's books and teaching her songs from Vasha's childhood. They explained honestly, in age-appropriate ways, why she had to be careful about being seen by strangers, why her family was different from others, why love sometimes meant being brave in the face of people who would not understand. Thessa grew strong and clever and compassionate, shaped by parents who adored her and each other. She learned to help on the farm almost as soon as she could walk, developing her mother's instinct for growing things and her father's patience with animals. She was living proof that the divisions between their peoples were not insurmountable, that something beautiful could grow from the joining of different worlds. As Thessa approached her 5th birthday, Nathan and Vasha made a decision. They would stay on the farm, continue building their life here, but they would stop hiding quite so thoroughly. They would not flaunt Vasha's presence or deliberately court danger, but they would also not live in constant fear. Their love had survived too much to be diminished by ongoing secrecy. So when the harvest festival came to the nearest town that autumn, they went together as a family for the first time. Vasha wore a shawl that partially obscured her features, but did not hide what she was. Nathan walked beside her with Thessa between them, and they braced for confrontation. There were stares, whispers, a few hostile looks and people who crossed the street to avoid them, but there were also more people than they expected who simply nodded politely, who seemed unbothered by the sight of a mixed family. The world was changing slowly, and perhaps there was more tolerance growing than they had dared to hope. They bought supplies, let Thessa pick out a toy from a merchant's stall, and walked through the festival with their heads high. It was not perfect acceptance, but it was a start, a small step toward living more openly. On the way home, with Thessa drowsing in Nathan's arms and the wagon loaded with supplies, Vasha looked at the life they had built and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about the desperate woman who had fled barefoot through the forest all those years ago, certain she was running toward death or just a different kind of prison. She thought about Nathan choosing courage over comfort, hiding her when the riders came, teaching her that trust could be rewarded rather than betrayed. "What are you thinking about?" Nathan asked, echoing a question he had posed countless times over the years. "That I am happy," Vasha said simply. "That I have you and Thessa and this life we built together. That I am grateful every day for your courage and kindness when I needed them most." She reached across to take his free hand. "That I love you, Nathan Hartley, and I am so very glad you hid me until the riders passed, because it gave us the chance to find this." Nathan raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I am glad too. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Vasha. You and Thessa. My family." They rode on through the autumn afternoon, the farmhouse growing visible in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney that meant the fire they had banked before leaving was still burning strong. Home was waiting, comfortable and familiar, filled with years of memories and the promise of more to come. Vasha had run barefoot through a frozen forest, fleeing a cruel master, certain her story was ending. Instead, she had found Nathan Hartley, who gave her sanctuary when she needed it most. Together they had built something neither expected, a love that transcended the boundaries their peoples insisted should divide them. They had created a home, a family, a future that honored both their heritages while forging something entirely new. The orc bride had fled her cruel master and found something better than mere survival. She had found love, partnership, and belonging. She had found the happy ending she never dared to dream possible, all because one human farmer had chosen compassion over fear and hidden her until the riders passed. And that, Vasher reflected as they pulled into the yard and began unloading supplies with Thesser running excitedly ahead, was better than any story in Nathan's books. Because this was real, this was theirs, and this was the life they would continue building together for all the years to come. Their story had begun with desperate flight and an act of courageous kindness. It continued through seasons of trust being carefully built, love growing in unexpected places, and two people learning they were better together than apart. And it would go on, she knew, through whatever challenges the future brought, because they had each other and that was enough. Vasha looked at Nathan helping Thessa carry her new toy inside, looked at the farmhouse that had transformed from a stranger's home to her own, looked at the fields she had helped plant and tend, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had fled barefoot through darkness and found the light. She had run from cruelty and discovered kindness. She had escaped one fate and claimed another, better one. And she would spend the rest of her life grateful for the man who had seen her as worth saving, who had built a life with her instead of simply offering shelter, who had loved her not despite what she was, but because of who she was. The riders had passed years ago. The danger had faded into memory. But the love remained, growing stronger with each passing season, and Vasha knew it would endure as long as they both lived and beyond into the legacy they would leave for Thessa, and whatever other children might come. This was her happy ending, hard-won and precious. This was home.